Hi, good morning. This is Jerry Lawrence, the chairman of the Delaware County Board of Elections. Welcome to our June 22nd, 2020 meeting, the purpose of which is to certify the results of the June 2nd primary election. First of all, I want to apologize. I understand we are 12 minutes late joining. We have a vendor, Phoenix Media, that probably shows up on your screen, shows up on my screen, that's what that is, who sets these up, and they had some technical difficulties getting us all online this morning, but we are online and ready to go. We have a short agenda. We'll start, as we always do, with the Pledge of Allegiance. Unfortunately, we relocated to another conference room that doesn't have a flag, so we'll just rise and say the pledge. I pledge of allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Like I said, we have a relatively brief agenda this morning to certify the results of the election and to undertake certain other administrative or technical duties that are involved with signing reports and so forth that we have to submit to the state with the results. I'd like to start, though, with a couple of comments and observations about the election and about the last couple of months. The election is really two stories. There's a story of an extraordinary thing that happened in Delaware County on June the 2nd, and that is that 140,000 people voted. About 75,000 of them went to polling places and voted, and the balance of which voted by mail. It was a tremendous effort that was complicated by 4 or 5 very significant events, and I'll talk about that a little bit in a minute. But it was also an effort that was not perfect. There were things that didn't go as planned. There were some decisions made that maybe we will make differently in the future, and particularly with respect to the absentee ballots, the volume of the absentee ballots that we received, and the manner in which they were processed. We're going to do a lot better. We were frankly just overwhelmed, and I'll talk a little bit about that. But the reason for the success that we did have, the reason we did have an election, the reason we did have 75,000 people polled that day, a total of 140,000 people vote, was because of a lot of extraordinary efforts. We have tremendous people at the Board of Elections, employees. We have tremendous people that are poll workers and election workers, over 1,000 local election board members that work that election to make that happen. And we had a ton of community volunteers, something that we've always had in the past from traditional places like the League of Women Voters, but we also had support in this election from places that don't normally work with us, like the Delaware County Medical Response Corps. This election started with us having new machines. We knew in January, and we were speaking about it at our meetings, if you follow us, that we had a big challenge ahead of us with new machines. The state decertified the prior machines we used. Every county in Pennsylvania had to, by this election, this 2020 primary election, switch over to a machine that has a permanent paper ballot, paper record. We spent most of the first half of last year with Chairman Belafonte studying the various machines that were available, working with the then County Council to identify the resources that were going to be afforded for those machines, the election board staff making recommendations, the board itself following those, and ultimately the County Council following that and purchasing new machines. Obviously, different technology, different procedures, big learning curve, big training requirement for our poll workers. The second big challenge we had was Act 77. Act 77 passed last year. The legislature changed a number of technical issues in the code, but specifically and most significantly changed the ability to vote from home. Instead of in the past, with an absentee ballot, you needed to show an impediment to voting. You had to prove that you were unable to vote either because of a physical limitation such as illness or a restriction that you were traveling, you were going to be out of town or otherwise unavailable. Under the Act 77, there's the no excuse mail-in vote, the no requirement mail-in vote, the vote at home ballot, whatever you want to call it. If you wish to vote at home, you could vote at home. We obviously expected an increase in the number of ballots that would be received, but it was really overwhelming. To give you some perspective, in a typical federal primary election, we might receive between 3,000 and 5,000 ballots. In 2016, we had, I think, 46 or 4,700 absentee ballots. In this election, we had 86,000 absentee ballots. And over half of those absentee ballots were received, applications for absentee ballots were received after May 14th, meaning the last day to apply was May 26th, which is just 1 week before the election. And in that little less than 2 week period, going into that, we received this overwhelming. I offer this not as excuse. Obviously, many people receive their ballots late. They receive their ballots, some instances after the election. We made some preparations for that I'll talk about in a moment. But we did our best. We had people here 7 days a week till late in the evening, every day to process it. There's a lot of impediments that stand in the way of sending out ballots. I know if you're sitting at home and you're thinking about, well, how hard could it be? You get a request. You have to recognize that ballot security is very, very important. That there's a process that we have to use the SURE system, which is a state system that's computerized voter registration. It's very secure, but it's time consuming. Each application that comes in has to be processed through that system to make sure it's a registered voter. Make sure they haven't already voted or already requested an application. The system itself has several choke points. We have a limited number of terminals here at the county in which we can put people in to access that system. We got more for this election, but even as it was, we used every terminal we had for extended hours, and still a tremendous backlog. The SURE system itself was frankly overwhelmed, both in processing absentee applications, and then again, we use the system when the ballots come back. Last week, the week before, as we were counting, there were days when the system was just crawling along, where we weren't even able to get all of our terminals logged on because statewide, there was, similar to Delaware County, an overwhelming demand for absentee ballots and an overwhelming demand to then process those ballots after the election. It was slow. We're working to remedy this situation. We actually had a meeting here in the courthouse last week with the members of the Board of Elections, with Councilwoman Ruther, who is the point person on the county council, with the Secretary of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. The Secretary of Commonwealth is the state Board of Elections, if you will. It's the Pennsylvania Department of State is the entity of the Commonwealth that operates and supervises the election. But Secretary Bookvar was here herself, and Deputy Secretary Jonathan Marks, who's the Deputy Secretary who's in charge of the Election Division, is here as well. And we explained among the many concerns that we have, but one of them is our access to the SURE system and the number of terminals we have. And we're basically going to double the number of terminals we have for the fall. The process itself is also time consuming. After someone's checked in the system, labels have to be printed, ballots have to be printed, those materials all have to be stuffed and put together. You may say to yourself, well, why didn't you just start earlier? Well, we can't start till the ballot's decided. For those of you who are familiar with the process, you know that petitions are circulated prior to the election. There's then a chance for persons to object to those petitions, to say that persons who filed petitions for office didn't follow the rules or are otherwise unqualified, or there's a defect in the petition. It's in a court process that plays out. And the pandemic, the same way it affected our operations here and everyone else's lives, it affected the court system. Those ballot challenges took a longer time to resolve this year. We couldn't start the process until those ballot challenges were resolved, which was the last week of April. And once the ballot challenges are resolved and we know then who the candidates are and who we can put on the ballot, we can begin the process of the computer programming to generate that ballot and to get ballots out. And we got that done in about a week and started to send ballots out. But when you have a start date that's shortened, obviously it impacts your ability to get the ballots out. Um, Hopefully, or we know for the fall, because of the way the process works, there's not petitions and not balloting, we won't have that limited time constraint. We will obviously be able to start earlier. There were problems with delivery of the ballots. Some of those were our fault, obviously, because we were behind and overwhelmed and unable to get ballots out. Some of them have to do with the design of the shore system, certain things we learned about address formatting, that again, when there's a couple of thousand ballots in a year versus 85,000 ballots in a year, these problems weren't manifest or weren't manifest to the significant extent that they were now. There are also software issues that have to do with how the labels are printed. In particular, there was issues with apartment numbers and how apartment numbers are printed, and they weren't printed in the proper spot, or sometimes not at all on the mailing labels. We worked with the state to resolve those issues, but that resulted in a lot of mail that went out, came back, had to be sent out again. Adds to that backlog, adds to the amount of work. All of this is not an excuse, but it's to explain to people who are concerned and legitimately concerned that they got their ballot late, that they didn't get a ballot at all, the reasons why that happened. Our personnel in the department worked extraordinarily hard. When they recognized that there were issues, that they were understaffed, they requested more resources. You have a system in the Board of Elections where we don't have a huge staff. We have 4 full-time employees. When I first started in this role 15 years ago, we had about 10 people working in that office. And over time, that office has decreased in size. And although Ms. Hagan and others who recognize these issues stepped up, trying to get people and hire people and train people in a pandemic is a difficult thing to do. And we had people that were hired and supposed to start and didn't show up for work, and then we had to get more people. At the end, frankly, it was extraordinary to see virtually just volunteers, anybody who could coming in to help put these ballots together, stuff them, get them out. And the job got done. Some of them went out late. We know of a number that were sent out on election day itself. Went to court, the Board of Elections did, got relief from the court, got a special order from the court that persons in that group of ballots were permitted to mail their ballots in for 10 days after the election, and if they were received at the Board of Elections by the 13th of June, 10 days after the election, those ballots were counted. There was about 300 of those ballots that ended up being counted. Again, that was our fault, our mistake that they didn't get done in a timely way, but we did our best. We went to court, we tried to get relief so that those persons would be able to vote. The election that was actually conducted, the in-person election on election day, there were difficulties there too. It went remarkably well in comparison to what we've seen on television from Georgia, Wisconsin, where there were long lines and people that were unable to vote. We simply didn't have that. Sure, there were instances where people had to wait, or sure, there were instances where a particular machine wasn't working well for a period of time, but we did not have widespread disenfranchisement of the voters. There were some issues during the day when provisional ballots had to be printed and taken out to a number of polling places throughout the day. Our judges of elections, people that actually run those polling places and in charge, are very much on top of things. And by and large, called us in a timely way and gave us warnings so that we could get those ballots out to them. It was a tremendous effort again on election day, all hands effort to get those ballots printed, get those ballots out. But we know when a voter shows up and there's no ballot, they don't want to be sent away. They don't want to be able to vote. So we wanted to get those ballots out. I can tell you, being here during the return of materials on election night, tons of those ballots came back unused. And Ms. Hagan sort of chuckling because she knows the work it took to send them out. But you know what? We had to get them out there so that people had a supply of ballots and were comfortable that they weren't going to run out. The return of the ballots on election night. For those of you who aren't involved in that process, how it works is, and it's always worked this way when we have the old machines, is that the judge of election, the person that's in charge of each of the polling places throughout the country, they have to bring back the election materials on election night. Materials are a little different this time because they were bringing back the actual ballots, but it's a process that's going on for years. Generally, starts after the polls close and after the judge is able to gather up the materials that they need and put them together and bring them in. But so it starts slightly after 8 o'clock. It's generally done by 12 o'clock. went to 2 o'clock in the morning. It's a really I was there in the parking garage myself when the last cars were coming through, and I talked to a couple of judges of elections right at the end of the line, one in particular who I couldn't believe the remarkably good mood he was in. He told me he waited 4 hours in line to drop off. It tells you a lot about the people that we have in this town, about people who spend their time working on local election boards, people who really believe in the process and the importance of it, that even though he sat in his car for hours to drop off his materials, he did it, wasn't particularly happy about it, but he did it with a smile on his face, and he was pleasant when I talked. We did our best on election night, and I do really want to apologize. We put up a statement the day after the election, apologizing in particular to the people that were in that line to drop off their materials. We had to come up with a way to ensure that custody and safety of those ballots, so that they wouldn't be lost, they would be counted, they would be tracked, they would be traced, they would be followed. That required paperwork to be signed and exchanged so that we had a record of where the ballots were. And we had to do it in a way that complied with social distancing requirements. Until this year, the typical procedure was people would park their cars in the garage, come upstairs through the courthouse, go through a kind of assembly line, if you will, in the cafeteria, dropping off their materials, go back to their cars. Well, you couldn't come in the courthouse. You couldn't get out of your car. So we set up a system in the courthouse garage that was access to the garage was controlled by the police. Cars were let in. There was a line of cars, and they snaked around to 3 different stations where they dropped off the materials, similar to the process that used to take place in the cafeteria, but it was a lot easier when it was in the cafeteria. And it was a lot easier when it was the same process that was followed for year after year. The new process this year was different. It involved a lot more people, and it took a really crazy long time. We thought it was a good way to do it, an efficient way to do it, and we're back at the drawing board to figure out how we're going to do it for the fall, because we recognize people who have been working at a poll since sometime shortly after 6 o'clock in the morning to get ready to open at 7 in the morning. We really can't ask them to wait in their car for 4 hours till 2 in the morning the next day to drop off their ballots. And we're going to be better at that, and we're going to get that done better. And we certainly apologize to the people who worked so hard for that. I mentioned our people and how valuable and important they are. The Board of Elections has 3 departments, if you will. There's 3 department heads. 2 of the 3 department heads retired at the end of last year. So January, we were left with vacancies in those positions. The one department is the voter registration. Crystal Winterbottom, who has been a long-time employee there for 15 or more years, stepped up and became the acting director of the voter registration office. Again, thrown into a very turbulent and difficult situation with new procedures, new laws to follow, and a virus requiring social distancing, changes in procedures. Crystal worked incredible hours. Her staff worked incredible hours. They got voter registrations done. They helped with that process I was describing earlier, because they also have these same shore terminals, these terminals that connect to the state registration database, and they were able to use those to help us get ballots out. The second part of our operation is the voting machine warehouse. The voting machine warehouse is, to put it in the simplest terms, it's obviously a lot more involved in this, responsible for the physical equipment, the things that you see at the polling place when you vote on election day. They have to maintain that equipment, program that equipment, test that equipment, ensure that that equipment is actually delivered to the polling places, and then eventually retrieve that equipment from the polling places. They also have to find places to hold the election, which was a tremendous challenge when so many places that we use, either because they cater to high at-risk populations, or they were uncomfortable with having strangers come into their facility during a pandemic, were unavailable. Jim Savage took that position over in a very challenging time, without experience in that field, and I think did a terrific job. Every polling place had equipment. That equipment worked. throughout the course of the day, when there were issues with that equipment, Jim was able to get his staff there to get that equipment operational, to give additional training. And we had a video training. Video training is not the same as hands-on training. Video training is not the same as using the same equipment that we had for the last 10 or 12 years when people were familiar with how to do it. But Jim's staff was able to jump in where necessary and make sure that the ballot marking devices were operational and that the persons working the polls were able to do that. The third leg of our system is the Bureau of Elections itself. The Chief Clerk, William Hagan, Ms. Hagan again, someone who has been here for 15 plus years and works hard every election. Every election is kind of a sprint the last couple of weeks to get everything done. Here the sprint started in January before we even had COVID, and we just knew we had new machines and we were going to have to train people and probably find some new people to work those machines. And as all these factors added on, virus, new polling locations, new poll workers needing to be recruited, it just got more and more and more and more difficult. And I can say, I'm sure the other board members will tell you as well, that Ms. Hagan, extraordinary efforts over the last 3 or 4 months, right through the election, the last couple of weeks to get the ballots counted, long days, working through lots and lots of problems. All of those difficulties I was talking about before with getting ballots out, the computer systems, with the stuffing of the ballots, the processes really significantly involved and time-consuming, and something that she had to work with every day. And we're very much indebted to her staff who works so hard to get this. I've been on the board now for 15 plus years, and I can tell you, I don't ever remember interacting with people outside the Board of Elections until this election. But in this election, the entire county government structure pitched in, starting, of course, with members of council. Councilwoman Luther was very involved throughout the entire process, trying to identify where the holes were, where the problems were, what kind of resources could be brought in. Both Councilman Zidek and Madden were in the Board of Elections with regularity on election day, other days. Councilman Madden came down and said, "What can I do to help?" And he said, "Well, we need more people on the phones. We need perhaps help get people on the phones." And he said, "All right, where's the phone? I got a couple hours. I'll help to answer these calls to voters so they can put it balance." Obviously they have a difficult circumstance. It takes years and years to get to the point where the Board of Elections has the limited resources that they have, and it takes time to build that back up. And it's difficult to build that back up during the pandemic. They did their best, and they are involved already in the process of looking at how do we move forward. So we met last week with the Secretary of State. We have a meeting with the Board of Elections, that is, a meeting later this week with the County Council to talk about what resources County Council can bring to make things go more smoothly. Mary Ann Grace, who is the Chief Administrative Officer of the county, was instrumental in a task force that met every week throughout the spring to identify what resources were needed from the county and how things could be done to step in and solve these problems. Much of the new voting system involves information technology. Obviously, we have new computer equipment that scans the ballots and programming to program the machines. There's a lot of interaction with the SURE system that I mentioned. We saw extraordinary efforts, particularly from John Bartram, County IT. I mean, Dylan, they were the 2 point people from IT that were directly involved on a day-to-day basis working to solve these problems of printing, labels, and all the other complications that I alluded to. And Rich Stefanos and Joan Dodd, who were the heads of county IT, the county print shop. There's so much paperwork still in the election process, from provisional ballots to the mail-in ballots to notices that get printed and put out in the mail, the postcards that were sent to people unchanged polling place, but Donna Burnett from the print shop really was important, significant, and worked hard. Mike Madden in purchasing, got the PPE, personal protective equipment that you saw at the polling places, pens, masks, hand sanitizer, all those things they got it put together. Nick Micarelli, Community Transit, they were responsible for on election day, bringing materials out early in the morning before polling places open, getting those lists out that we used to identify who had requested a mail-in ballot at the last minute, should be crossed off out of the poll books. And these people were working very hard that day to get things delivered. The park police and the sheriff were really very supportive on election day. They helped with supervising. They see the ballots here. They helped throughout the day. Just at the drop boxes that were at the front door. Since they were answering questions all day long, the voters came in. They did a lot of things that are extraordinary and outside their usual responsibility. They guarded the ballots to make sure that they were safe. We rely a lot on the political parties. We rely a lot on other community groups. I mentioned earlier, the Medical Response Corps is not usually a community group that's involved in the election, but they stepped up and provided a ton of volunteers for on election night. That operation that took place in the garage to help move materials from cars and put it into the holding areas, and the escorts from the county police to bring it upstairs. We're very indebted to them and appreciative of them. We were the voters who played an important role all throughout this process, starting even before COVID, when we were looking for help in training people with the voting machines and how to vote. They were involved from the start, and then throughout the process, participating in the election task force, ideas and personnel, and helping to recruit people to work in the polling places. So, as I said from the start, things didn't go as planned in some instances. Some things weren't perfect, even some mistakes. But a lot of people worked very hard. And when you step back and you look at it, we did conduct an election. We had 140,000, almost 141,000 people voted. It was 34.85% turnout, 35% turnout. Primary, where there was very few races across the county. The marquee races, the race for president, congressional races were long decided. They weren't even close. So there wasn't necessarily the interest or the things that typically drive a huge turnout, and we still had it at 35% turnout. We as a board, I think, recognize we have a lot of work to do. I alluded to some of the things we're already doing to start on that. We're going to work hard this summer, and we're going to be better in the fall. But we are thankful for everyone who worked so hard in this election that we just had. So I guess I probably went on a little longer than I'd hoped to, but we do have a couple of agenda items, and I know we have some public comments in. So, Ms. Hagan, do you want to go over the paperwork for certification of the election results?
Certainly. We have, with the system, we have 3 reports that'll make up our official certification of election results. There is the cumulative report, a precinct report, and then a write-in report. So I will have a copy of that for each board member in a PDF, as well as for the 2 parties, so that you'll get your full election results. So I ask that the board, there's a report that goes to Department of State, which summarizes the cumulative report for the statewide offices, and to determine this set of 3 results to be our official election results. So I'll ask the board to certify those results. At this time, there has been no petition to accumulate any write-in. So I believe these results stand as they are.
Okay, so go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, just a point of order. I think are we going? You're asking us to vote on this at this point in time? Is that what we're going to do?
Yeah.
And I just I wonder if there are any comments or questions that are relative to these comments to our vote, because it's something I think, and Manley, this is your call for sure, but I think that should be heard before we vote, if there are comments that are related to the vote. And I do have one comment that was sent to me that I could read out, but I think I should. But I do think that, under the rules of order, if there are comments germane to a question that the board is going to vote on, they should be heard before we vote so that we can consider those comments.
We've typically had public comment at the end, although I can think of instances where, like on the voting machines, we've heard comment during the meeting. So mainly it's up to you as the parliamentarian to make a ruling. But if Mr. Byrne wants to make a comment, or somebody comment.
I believe that comment that goes specifically to the accuracy of the numbers that are being asked to be certified would be in order. Comment that more generally relates to the election process that doesn't pertain to the accuracy, I believe, should wait until the public comment at the end.
I agree with that. I just don't know what the comments are, whether there are any. That's all I'm asking.
Oh, well, we have comments.
Comment that I have, I can read at the end. But the other comments, I don't know if there's any that are in particular, specific to the question before us now.
We have a couple here. Second. That doesn't seem to say anything about it. I'm looking at them hard, but I hope I can understand. Jim, there's so many of these comments here. I haven't reviewed them.
I don't put you on the spot. I know.
Right. In particular, they're generally a couple of them. This was my experience with the polling place. I can say this: we certainly haven't had anybody reach out to us and say, "I know this is wrong. I know this." There's a mistake here. We released the preliminary results last Thursday afternoon. We haven't gotten any specific comments back on that from.
Yeah, I guess, Mr. Chairman, what I'm afraid of, and I don't mean to put you on the spot. I know it's a hard job you have there, and but this was a different election, and and I don't know how many things that I have heard are rumors and how many are fact, and I think if there are comments if some of the comments that I've heard are true, it makes me very uneasy. I don't know that they're true. I don't know what they are, but if there were comments out there that maybe are backed up or are comments that are relative to the vote I'm going to make, that's all I really wanted to know about.
And I know what you're saying, and what Mr. Byrne, I think, is alluding to is, we have seen things in social media. We have seen some things that are sent to us directly that have said or suggested that persons observed things that were election irregularities. To the extent we receive something at the Board of Elections that is specific, that identifies a place and what happened, we investigate that. We refer that over to the District Attorney's Office, and the CID division looks into that. We don't have our own Board of Elections of police force, so what the code says, when we see that, we look into it. I know there was one thing in particular that I was involved in last week. There was a photograph of a couple of bags that weren't the ballot bags, but they were the bags that the voter registration uses to bring materials back, and there was a photograph of them on the ground by a car, and somebody said these are ballots that were dumped or lost or something. About a couple hours after that, we got another photograph of the same ballot bags that actually showed they were in our garage being received, and the county police officer standing within a couple of feet of them, and we know from where the place was in the garage that they were in direct view of the table where the personnel from the voter registration was supervising. They had probably just been set on the ground momentarily while they were being retrieved from a car. What happens is and we turned that information over to our solicitor, turned that information over to CID. But you see this information on the internet, and somebody makes an allegation, and without facts or specifics, we look into it, we try to investigate it. If there are people out there that think there were specific instances, judges of elections, they control their polling places. They know the procedures about how to report irregularities to us. They have a duty to do that. To the extent we get communication from a member of the local election board or from the judge of election about something that happened in the polling place, we will investigate that. We always have, and we always will. But you're right, it was a different procedure this time. People are concerned about things. We were very concerned about ballot security, and that was one of the reasons that we proceeded in the way that we proceeded. Ballots were collected by the judges of elections. They were sealed into those bags. There was a seal put on those bags, and the judges of elections transported them here to the courthouse. They were signed in at the courthouse. They were tracked throughout the process. They were stored in the room where they were counted. We had the live videos so that you could watch 24 hours a day the ballot. You could watch the counting. There were watchers there while the counting was going on. So I feel that we took appropriate actions, and to the extent there's people out there that have information to the contrary, they should come forward. There will be appropriate criminal investigation undertaken if people have allegations about irregularity in the election process. So if you want to read the comment, you may, but
No, I'll read. The one I have is more general, and I'll read that at the end. I just wanted to make sure there was none on there that, somebody saying I saw this happen and that shouldn't influence your vote today because you should have known about this. That's what I was wondering if it were in any of the comments.
Yeah, I mean, we're going to read them all in their entirety when we're done today. Like I say, they're on the side of the screen here. They're emails, and I'm trying to look at them, but we could stop the meeting for a half hour and read them all now. I don't know that that's really particularly efficient.
Okay.
I'd say,
If I might just briefly address the ballot bag photograph, so-called ballot bag photograph that Mr. Lawrence referenced. Just to reiterate, they weren't ballots. They were other election materials being returned to voter registration. And as Mr. Lawrence indicated, as soon as that came to our attention, it was referred to the DA's investigation division. And I met with the DA and with our chief clerk in a three-way meeting to discuss those photographs. And as Chairman Lawrence indicated, another photograph not similarly cropped revealed that those ballot bags were simply photographed during the drop-off process and in our garage in the presence of the police. And again, they aren't ballots anyway. They were other election materials. So to the extent that people have concerns about that or they've run across that, that was thoroughly investigated and, if I may use the term, debunked.
Okay. We are doing things as observed. It's a very different election. So typically what happens is we are all in the same room and we vote, and then we have to sign the stack of forms that says we certify the election. Ms. Hagan sent us all the preliminary results last Thursday. So we don't have them in front of us on the table like we normally do. But we all have them, and typically there's a motion made to certify the results of the election, and we vote on it, and then we do the signing. I guess we'll have to work out how Mr. Byrne and Ms. Online have to come down here, sign it, and so forth.
Yes.
But I would look for a motion at this time.
Jerry, I'll make that motion. A motion to certify the election results. If you can hear me, I have some audio issues. So.
Now we hear you loud and clear.
I would second the motion, but would ask for some discussion if we could.
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, so Jerry, Mr. Chairman, I think your comments were very well said and very well taken. I mean, we do have a lot of hard workers that really worked hard during this election, and I don't mean to take anything away from anybody. In fact, when we wrote the letter to the Daily Times, you'll remember one of my comments was that we have to own this and we have to own these mistakes. And I think we did. And I think we should continue to own them, because even though, as you said, Jerry, we did our very, very best, our very best wasn't good enough. This election was not pretty. And I don't want to sugarcoat it that there was anything pretty about it. I've been doing this and on the election board for only a few months, and I'll admit that I don't know everything about the election board, and I don't know all of the election laws. But what I do know is that our job is to make sure that we have a fair and transparent and an election that's open to everyone. And I just don't think we did our job well here. And as I mentioned before, I'm not a big fan of the boxes. I think they're not secure. I think they lead to problems. I'm not a fan of the paying for stamps. I think that's a problem. I'm very uneasy about the way the returns were made and how long it took the voters. I'm uneasy about the counts and the different, and as I said before, I don't know that they're true or they're not true, but the different things I would hear about the counts. And I'm disappointed, not in anybody, beyond myself, that we were the last state or the last county in the state to be in a position to certify our elections. So with all that said, I think it's incumbent on us to do something about this post-election. And I know that we said we would work on this, but my suggestion would be that we get maybe a 9-person panel, bipartisan, to review it from the outside. As I said, I've only been doing this as a election board member for a couple of months, but I've been working the polls for 40 some years. And I know that there were a lot of changes and there were a lot of outside conditions that affected this election. But I also know that we can do a lot better, and that there are a lot of fine people out there who've worked on these election boards and election problems before, that we could get a panel that's really good, take a look at what we're doing, and have it be a bipartisan panel that's transparent to everyone. That's my thoughts on it before we certify.
So I agree with a lot of what you said, that we do have the responsibility for what happened, that we have a duty to conduct a fair and transparent election. I think that we did. I don't think you're saying that we didn't, are you, Jim?
No, I'm not saying we didn't. I'm just saying that it was different. It was messy.
There were certainly things about it that were missing. I'm not proud of the fact that it took till 2 a.m. to get people through that garage. But I think the fundamental issues of fairness and transparency, and you agree with me, we achieved that. We had a fair election, we had a transparent election, and that's what we owe people. Can we do it better? Absolutely. Will we do it better? Absolutely. Are we going to take every step that we possibly can to make it better? Absolutely. Are we willing to listen to bipartisan voices to do it? Absolutely. We had Chairman McGarrigle in a couple of months ago, showed him the equipment. I told him that day, I appreciate your many years of service to the county council, as a chairman of the county council, as an elected official, as a political party official, and here's my card. I want to hear from you, call me. And I'm still willing to listen to him and anyone else who has that. There's been even a couple of voters, committee persons that have reached out to me, and I've responded to them. And I think you raise a good point about listening to all voices, and we should figure out an efficient way to do that going forward. Ashley, do you have a comment?
Just briefly, I agree with what you said, Jerry, about transparency, and I'm glad, Jim, that you feel that way. I do think that we've acknowledged many mistakes, and I consider them opportunities, and really look forward to taking them. I mean, it was extraordinary circumstances in the history of the world, no less, in Delaware County for the election, with the pandemic adding a layer of incredible complexity. So, but I do want to say that despite the mistakes, I do think that the process has been one bipartisan. The administrative meetings where all 3 board members were invited. I think even Chairman McGarrigle not only was invited but attended. That was one meeting where I had a conflict, but everybody has had the opportunity, including Jim, but others who the heads of the different departments were not. I don't know what party they belong to as they come into those meetings. So there's been incredible bipartisanship along the way, and I'm proud of that. And there's also been transparency because those meetings were open to that attendance. The chairman was welcome when I believe my colleague Jim Byrne asked if he could attend, and Jim is always welcome to attend, and I hope we continue with that. And I think we have an important bipartisan committee right here. We have the election board, which has 3 voices, and Jim, you have a great reputation and history and experience that you bring to that bipartisan discussion. So I look forward to taking what has happened in the past and seeing it as an opportunity for improvement. And I think that everybody here is fully dedicated. I hear it in all that Jerry said. I hear it in all that Jim said. I too am fully dedicated to doing better in November. And what I appreciate most is because of the difficulties, they've really revealed opportunities in almost granular detail on how to improve and how to better run this election in the fall, which is surely going to have a lot of voter interest, as it should. So thank you for everybody in the election bureau and the warehouse and voter registration. I have witnessed with my own eyes people working extraordinary amount of time and hours and weekends and holidays, and all the departments coming together to provide assistance and volunteers in the community. And it was just an extraordinary effort. And while we will do better in the fall, I think that in terms of bipartisanship and transparency, I think we did succeed, and look forward to continuing with both of those in mind at all times as we move forward to prepare for the fall.
If there's additional comment, or we can call a question to certify the election.
No additional comment from me.
So I'll call a question. All those in favor of certifying the election result, vote aye. Aye.
Aye.
I'm going to vote nay because I want to keep the heat on us in particular to make sure that we have this election. So I vote nay. I'm a little uneasy about everything that happened, but I want to put the pressure on the board, including myself, to make sure we do our best in the next election.
All right. What's next?
Okay, the next item is the certification to the state for reimbursement of absentee ballots sent to military individuals domestically and overseas. That reimbursement will come to $81.60. I will.
Is there a motion to approve?
There is a motion to approve.
Second.
Yes, second. I'm sorry.
All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? So that carries.
Okay. And the last thing I have is the 2 unofficial, is the board to ratify the unofficial returns of our reporting of results to Department of State. State law requires it this Tuesday after the election. And we also did it last Tuesday to the state as well. And I have both of those reports that were sent to the state and asked for the ratification of the board to approve those documents.
Motion to ratify the reports that Ms. Hagan sent.
So moved.
The second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed?
And I'm going to vote in sync with what my earlier vote was. I'm going to vote nay on this vote as well.
Okay. Anything else, Ms. Hagan?
That is all I have.
All right, Mr. Savage.
Good morning.
So I just wanted to make sure you were on. So Mr. Savage, who is the director of the voting machine warehouse, amongst his many duties is the emergency temporary relocation of polling places. In other words, polling places that become unavailable after the last meeting of the Board of Elections prior to the election. Mr. Savage has discretion to relocate those places. I believe there were 2. He sent us that information earlier today, and will now present them for ratification.
Yes, so we had Ridley 1-3, which moved from Fairview AME Church to Woodland Fire Company, and Fallcroft 1, which moved from St. John's Lutheran Church to Fallcroft Union Church. As soon as we became aware and found alternative locations, we, as you know, I notified the board, notified the party leaders, and we posted signs at the old and new polling locations.
Do we have, do we want to do them all together?
I think so.
I'm okay.
I would move. Everybody's okay with that? Then I so move to ratify the decision for the polling location changes that were made and just announced by Jim Savage.
Second that.
All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? There being none, the motion passes. Mr. Savage, you have anything else, sir?
No, I don't. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So that concludes our agenda. Do any of the board members want to raise any new matter?
I just have one comment. Or should I do it now or is that with the public
You can
comment?
go first. We're going to go to public comment next, so.
Okay.
you can start.
Of course, my computer turned off. In 1 second.
Sure.
Okay, so I had a call and and an email from a call from Tom McGarrigle and an email from Andy Riley, and I'm just going to read you Mr. Riley's recommendation, and he recommends that the meeting process that is set up, that's been set up by the election board with the Zoom and with the as a result of the coronavirus and the Zoom meetings, shuts out important public comment and cooperation from the political parties. They should permit a representative of the Delaware County Democratic Party and the Delaware County Republican Party live on the Zoom calls, as cooperation with the political parties is critical to a smooth and error-free election. This must be an atmosphere that is open and transparent, that invites dialogue, not one that limits dialogue to one member of the board outside of the view of the public and the press. And that's the end of his comment.
Frankly, I agree with a lot of what, it was Mr. Riley or Mr. McGarrigle, I forget.
That was Mr. Riley.
Mr. Riley said there. I think the Zoom process stinks. I really used to like when we had meetings and we had the public there and you could have a dialogue and people would come forward with ideas, and some of them were good, some of them were not so good, but we could engage with them. And I would like to see a way to do that. Now, this request, I actually read it this morning. It was sent to me late last night to allow Mr. Riley to participate via the Zoom. I have some concern, and we can work through, perhaps it's with our solicitor, that if we grant Mr. Riley a special privilege, or Mr. McGarrigle or Ms. Gagne from the Democratic Party, he requested this privilege, but other people who are just general members of the public wouldn't have that. And we all know that the kind of best practices for public meetings that is developed during this pandemic is to have this kind of moderated Zoom call. That's why we have Phoenix Media, because it eliminates, I forget what the Zoom bombing, where somebody gets on and does something inappropriate or shows something offensive. So we have to figure that out. But yeah, I think it would be a worthwhile thing to figure out how to have that dialogue. I think we're all in favor of that dialogue, and I'm happy to have it in a public forum. I'm happy to speak to these gentlemen. They have my phone number. Want to hear their ideas. They have, both of them served on the county council. Both of them, they were both chairman of the county council, and they have a lot of good ideas and thoughts to add to this conversation, and we need to do that. Fairness and transparency are important. I think the three of us have worked and done our best to ensure fairness and transparency, and we need to continue to do that, and we need our constituents. Ultimately, the voters, but in particular the leaders of the political parties to believe in the system and do what's necessary. So, as we go forward, we can figure out some way to have a better dialogue.
Jerry, can I just add, I think that's a very important point. I mean, I think that the three of us are ultimately recommended and appointed by the bipartisan process. So as Jim has been able to share those views directly from the chairman and others that represent the party, and then we also, of course, would have access if Colleen Guiney wanted to reach out to any of us. I hope she would reach out to all of us. We are that bipartisan process. The members of the public and the concern that Jerry raised about the general members of the public who do not need to or have an obligation to be affiliated with a particular party to share their public comments are the ones that would have the least access. So this is not an ideal circumstance, and I hope we're moving forward to a green zone. We need to evaluate what that means for our public meetings. It's not a perfect process, but I do think that making sure that those who choose not to be particularly affiliated with a political party of either party still have the same opportunity for public comment that any of the rest of those who are affiliated do. So it's a difficult circumstance presented by the pandemic, and we are working through it. But I agree with ultimately, Jerry, what you just said about making sure that everybody have equal access to the ability to comment. We represent a bipartisan process, but making sure the general public has that access is incredibly important.
All right, we have a long list of public comments here. Ms. Hagan, you can start. I can tell from the number of them. At some point, I'll help you out. I'll leave some.
Okay.
There's a lot.
All right, the first one is from Shane Laird. This is to the board. It is my intention to make known to the Delaware County Board of Elections the issues and concerns surrounding the recent primary election that was held on June 2nd, 2020. Specifically, the actions or lack by the majority part of Aston GOP with the absence and neglect of the responsibilities to the people and voters of Aston Township. Aston Township majority political party is Republican GOP. All polling places in Aston have Republican judges of elections and majority inspectors. Unfortunately, these individuals did not fulfill their responsibilities before or on election day, nor did they communicate their intentions to us regarding their abandoning the voters of our community. As the minority party Democrat in Aston, it is our responsibility to staff each ward polling location with a minority inspector and clerk, but have not at any point in previous elections opened or closed polling locations. There are seven polling locations in Aston Township with consideration of the COVID-19 pandemic health concerns for election day volunteers and workers and the safety and well-being of voters. The polling sites were consolidated in Aston to two locations: Aston Elementary School consolidating wards 1, 2, and 3, and Aston Community Center consolidating wards 4, 5, 6, and 7. The Aston Elementary School polling location covering and handling 3 wards was not staffed, operated, run, or closed by the majority party. Instead, all of the majority party made a conscious decision not to show up on election day. There was no communication to the minority party by 2 out of 3 of the judges of elections from the consolidated polls. One specific ward judge of elections did communicate to the minority inspector of their ward with notification that due to multiple personal and family health reasons, they would not be able to physically be present at the consolidated polling location on election day. This one judge not only communicated and discussed the election with the minority inspector, but offered assistance to the minority inspector remotely, if needed, further requesting the minority inspector to act as a representative on the consolidated poll election board. Aside from the singular communication and notification, there was no notice or information given to the minority party by the majority party, and there was no judge of elections from the consolidated wards at the Aston Elementary School polling location. No majority inspectors arrived at any point, and no attempt was made by the majority party committee or chair to speak to the minority party committee or chair. As such, the minority party, having provided and ensured the 3 individuals willing to work at the polling location for election, became responsible for opening the polls, conducting the election, and delivering results to the Board of Elections. Polling location was opened promptly at 7:02, with voters able to cast their ballots as per the training provided to poll workers. At no time were voters turned away nor dissuaded from voting by any member of the Emergency Board of Election. that was created out of necessity to provide the voters an opportunity to cast their ballots. In point of fact, provisional ballots were not only provided, but fully explained to any voter with which there was the slightest question or concern. After the polling location was open, the Republican Party primary candidate for PA State Representative sent his daughters to the voting location to volunteer to work under the minority party acting judge. As the volunteers had no training of any sort or any idea of how to run an election, they were utilized as clerks and assistants to maintain a steady flow of voting throughout the entire primary election day. Although the Republican Board of Election members at the Aston Elementary School did not show up or follow their duties, they did make sure that individuals presenting their party were standing outside of the polling location, instructing voters not to follow the directions and instructions of the election board, including social distancing and ballot voting. They also made a point of attempting to enter the polling location well within the 10 feet of actual voting without poll watcher certifications or any other legal ability be that area. The Republican Party also made sure to have representatives of their party, including elected commissioners, make appearances at the polling location throughout the day. At no point did these individuals provide notification of their party's lack of appearance and neglecting of their responsibilities to the voters of Aston, nor did they issue an apology for their party's complete lack of communication or a thank you for the minority party picking up their slack to ensure that the voting could take place. Upon completion of the primary election, the polling location at Aston Elementary School was closed to voting at 8 p.m. All precautions, rules, and regulations were followed as instructed and trained by the minority party, despite the majority party suddenly appearing with over 8 individuals. None of these individuals were masked, and their initial attempts to enter the polling location was denied as they did not provide poll watcher certifications that would allow entrance. They returned with poll watcher certificates and were allowed to enter, at which point they went to great effort to make snide and callous comments about the election, the individuals working the location, and questioning the capability of the judge of election. Having personally witnessed the closing of the polls along with the chain of custody of the ballots and overall handing of the polls, I am extremely proud of the members of the minority party that made possible the right to vote for any Aston registered voters in wards 1, 2, and 3. The complete disregard of the voters of Aston, most of whom are members of the Republican Party by their own election board members and elected officials, is reprehensible and a disgrace. To further question the validity of the election, the ballots, or the process of the primary election is even more abhorrent, as the total neglect for the responsibility to their fellow township members is apparent by the absence from the polls, their attempts to cause discord, and complete and utter lack of communication. Sincerely, Shane Laird, Aston Democratic Committee Chair.
Dear Delco Election Board, I write as the leader of the communications team at the Hartford Democratic Party. It was my job to conduct interviews with various individuals who worked at the Election Bureau staff in order to explain the primary election snafus in a monthly newsletter. In the course of my interviews, I was struck by the dogged determination of those tasked to make the primary run properly despite many obstacles. Below is just one of those obstacles for which I quote from the Haverford Democratic Committee newsletter. The Delco Election Bureau received 4,703 applications for absentee ballots in the 2016 primary. Mail-in voting was signed into law as part of Act 77 in October 2019. Normal times, most people are slow to adopt behavioral changes like mail-in voting. There's good data on that human behavior in normal times. The generous estimate that the then understaffed Election Bureau should plan for 40,000 applications by early adopters in the 2020 primary election. That's 40,000. COVID hit and the Delaware County Bureau received over 85,000 applications for mail-in ballots for the 2020 primary election, which is 17-fold increase from 2016. To that stark fact, let's add that the Court of Common Pleas did not, for unknown reasons, set aside the 1 to 3 days that usually set aside to deal with petition signature challenges in a timely fashion. We had more candidates this time, so more challenges, and yet no time set aside. Why? They need to squeeze the hearings on those challenges into various spots in the judge's schedule, delayed the process more since no ballots could be printed until the challenges were settled. And of course, let's add that the Election Bureau staff have been left to shrink over the last few years. Equipment needs neglected and communications with the county council not regularized. Regrettably, before 2020, election board staff had little experience with actually working with council members in a tangible task-oriented way. This spring, members of council rolled up their sleeves and climbed down into the weeds with the Election Bureau staff, and the participants learned from that experience. They just couldn't rebuild the plane while it was flying. There was much to analyze in this primary and much to fix, but as I said at the start, I was been impressed by the dogged determination of both our new county council members and the overburdened Election Bureau staff. Impressed too by the volunteers who went in at some risk to help fulfill mail-in ballots. The best way to thank the Election Bureau staff is to hire more co-workers for them, give them printers that can handle the amount of printing needed at the speed needed and with the quality of print our new scanners require. And for heaven's sake, expand the number of shore terminals. The election board folks know how to run a smooth election, but they cannot do their job with their arms tied behind their backs. And this is from Diane Lehan. Dear board members, I have the pleasure to once again work outside my polling place on election day, and once again, it was a great experience. People were so grateful that we were there. Everyone was pleasant and great conversations were had with multiple voters. We had a very steady turnout and experienced very few problems. The problems we did face were the usual fare of where do I vote, my name is not spelled correctly, etc. We did have one or two people who didn't get their ballots, but we're okay with just voting with a mask on. The board inside the polling place worked hard and moved the voters along and answered questions in a pleasant and professional manner. I will say that our judge of elections was a new member of the board and was nervous and stressed. He and several other members did say they hoped for more training on the new machines and also more educational support on ballots that were not received so they could answer questions with even more confidence and knowledge. So my only suggestions is possibly having more than one training session for those who are working inside so they feel more confident. I'm aware of other problems throughout the county, but considering we had a pandemic right in the middle of the year with new machines and completely new voting rules, i.e. voting by mail, and completely new leadership in the county, I was impressed by how well the election went on. Realistically, we were never going to get out of this election with all of the new voting changes and new machines without some issues occurring. When you add in a pandemic and all the uncertainty that that caused, I must say it went off well, and now we have an outline on how to improve for November. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to you in November. Diane Lehan, 914 South Avenue, Seaton. Your turn.
Okay. Dear Board of Election members, I would first like to thank the following: Delco Board of Election members, Delco County Council, especially Christine Ruther, Marianne Grace, Chief Administrative Officer, Lorraine Hagan, Chief Clerk, Bureau of Elections, Crystal Winterbottom, Interim Director, Voter Registration, Jim Savage, Chief Custodian, Voting Machine Warehouse, plus all of the staff who worked in the various offices at the courthouse and the voting machine warehouse. All of their hard work and their very long hours led to a successful primary election under very difficult conditions. COVID-19 contributed to many of the challenges that the Bureau of Elections faced starting in mid-March when the PA state shutdown went into effect. Some of these challenges, to name a few, were consolidating 428 precincts into 190 polling locations and posting 2 notification signs at each precinct location that was being moved and 2 notification signs at the temporary precinct location which being moved to. Scanning over 85,000 absentee no excuse mail-in ballots which could not be scanned until 8 p.m. on June 2nd. Many of the precinct election boards are staffed with senior citizens who chose not to participate due to health concerns brought on by COVID-19. So many of the precinct election boards were staffed with individuals who may have had no prior experience, but they did their best under these conditions. Having a completely new voting system. Training of the new HART voting system was halted for the election board members and the general public when the Pennsylvania state shutdown started in mid-March. I would like to commend all of the individuals who did a yeoman job under these conditions. Moving forward to the November general election, let's all work to improve on the processes to make the November election even better. Signed, James Ziegelhofer.
Mr. Ziegelhofer is actually somebody who is very involved as a volunteer. He did the training in the libraries that we were doing before the COVID demonstrations that were training for the COVID. Somebody who deserves some thanks from us because he has helped out as a volunteer.
Most definitely. Next one is from Pamela Allen. The following two issues were observed while working the June 2nd primary election at Springfield Scenic Hills Elementary School. On two separate occasions, I saw voters approaching the polling place request that a representative of the Republican Party don a face mask prior to their voter entering the building. On both occasions, the party representative standing adjacent to the doorway had a confrontation with the voter stating that they were not required to wear a mask as long as they were outside the building. He did not move away from the door or put on a mask and did not make it clear to the voters in question that all of the poll workers inside the building were wearing protective masks. In both cases, the voters left, and I don't know whether they returned to vote. It should be also noted that the Democratic representative standing to the left of the entry doorway was wearing a mask. Second, a voter who could not be located in either the precinct voter registration 6-1 or 6-2 thought he might have registered independent. The voter was allowed to vote by the judge of elections for 6-2, who said he was familiar with the voter and knew that he had voted Republican in past elections. He was given a regular Republican ballot without signing the registrar. Signed, Pam and Hal Allen.
Well, that mailing is probably one we should have investigated.
Agreed.
Okay, we'll make sure that gets forwarded to you to take this.
Ms. Hagan, yeah, if you could just share that with me, we'll make sure that it gets properly investigated.
Okay.
This is from David Director to the Board of Elections. I'd like to begin by thanking the board and the entire election staff for the tremendous effort put forth in successfully holding the election under the most difficult conditions in living memory. This was an election beset with challenges even without the coronavirus outbreak, the result of the confluence of factors years in the making. To point fingers and blame is an ultimately self-defeating proposition, and I will not do so. I write today as a voter, a poll worker, and a volunteer of the mail-in crew. In each of these roles, I saw people doing their utmost to support the election in spite of rapidly changing and often conflicting advice from health officials and other state and federal authorities. The original challenge was going to be the new voting machines mandated by federal law and rolled out county by county in advance of the 2020 general election. This primary was to have been the dry run, giving both voters and poll workers a chance to try out the new system and work out the kinks. Then last November, a surprise, a major revision of the Pennsylvania election law featuring no excuse mail-in voting and other improvements designed to simplify voting. In response, we doubled our estimate for mail-in and absentee ballots from about 7,000 to 14,000. As we all know now, that estimate was short by more than 5 times, as over 85,000 mail-in ballots were requested and sent out. The arrival of the coronavirus brought preparations to a screeching halt, as many poll workers could not take the risk of illness, while at the same time, voters were strongly urged to vote by mail. Polling places were consolidated to reduce the number of workers needed. In-person training on the new machines was curtailed by necessity in favor of video, which exacerbated the potential weaknesses. In short, the primary season was a perfect storm of adverse occurrences, which would have been difficult to anticipate or plan for any under circumstances. To those critics who say that they could have done better, I ask, where were you when they were calling out for help? But I'd also like to speak as a retired software engineer who has spent decades working with clients to streamline manual processes, to augment or replace those processes with computers as appropriate, and to ensure that they are secure, reliable, transparent, and audible. I saw several such opportunities for improvement during my work, many of which could have accomplished at little or no cost to the county. Given the small breathing space we have before November, I would be happy to share details with the election board staff at your convenience. We have no time to waste.
This one was an attachment, so another window popped up. We got to read everyone. This is from Rachel Amdur, A-M-D-U-R. A new county council, a new law, new voting machines, and a pandemic. No one will ever say the 2020 primary election was easier when no one put out a hitch. It was messy. Heard that word before this morning, Jim. But through a lot of hard work from a lot of dedicated people, it got done. When the governor signed SB 422 that moved the primary from April 28th to June 2nd. It also allowed counties to move polling places and consolidate precincts without court approval. This was an overwhelming task to consolidate 400 plus precincts in Delaware County. To get this done, the Delco County Council reached out to the political parties for help. They have intimate knowledge of the individual polling locations of each of their municipalities. In Haverford Township, with 36 precincts, the Haverford Democrats went to work. Ward by ward, we reached out to every judge of election and inspector. We didn't just call Democratic judges of elections, we called them all. Many decided for their health or the health of their families that the risk was too great to work that day. The Haverford Democrats found more than 30 volunteers to be inside workers on election day to make sure each consolidated location had a minimum number of workers. We didn't ask their party registration, just that they would be willing to work that day. The Haverford Democrats also worked with the school district, the township, and local churches to find appropriate spaces. Through it all, the Haverford GOP was silent. Many of the Republican judges of elections asked, why aren't we hearing from the Republicans? For that, I had no answer. The county is overwhelmed, and I'm trying to help, I would say. I think everyone should be able to vote. We collected most of the Board of Election staff's email addresses for all 36 precincts. We were then able to pass along that information from the County Bureau of Elections quickly. I still wonder why in 2020, the previous county council never collected email addresses or even phone numbers from the judges of election. I had many of the Republican Board of Election workers thank me for keeping them in the loop. One Republican told me he's been working the polls for 20 years, and he was embarrassed by the silence from his party. I noticed that the day after the primary, the Haverford GOP found its voice. An email was first sent around calling the elections a debacle, unacceptable, and a complete failure. It was the first time anyone had heard anything from the GOP. As we move forward this fall, none of us know what the status of COVID-19 will be and how the county may have to alter their plans. Democrats and Republicans in Delaware County don't agree on much. I hope as Americans, we can agree that everyone should be able to exercise their vote. Once again, the Haverford Democrats will be ready to help. Sincerely, Rachel Amder, Chair of the Haverford Democratic Committee. The next one is Margaret Madison. My husband and I voted by mail. We were so grateful to have the option to do so. I have an injury that makes it impossible to walk long distances, and our car was in the shop. In ordinary times, I would get a ride or take a cab, but I didn't want to do that during a pandemic. I requested my ballot at the very last minute, 10 minutes to 5 p.m., and my husband requested his weeks before. We anxiously awaited their arrival, and they came the day of the election. I felt like the secret envelope system made sense to me and appreciated the transparency of the ballot counting when I received my email saying my vote was counted. It was great to be able to take our time filling out the ballot. I look forward to voting by mail in November. I am passionate about making sure that people have access to the ballot box. I'm concerned about the closing of polling places makes it harder and more confusing to vote. I hope that every effort is made to ensure access to the ballot box for November, especially if the coronavirus flares up in the fall. I would love to vote by mail to be the default. Regards, Margaret Patton. Scroll down. This is what it does. Ms. Patton doesn't have any other identifying information at the end. I'll keep going. I got it. So that was Rebecca DeValerio, and her address was there. And
This is
no, it was right at the top. From Robin Hood Lane in Aston, PA, to be read into the record. The primary election was held on June 2nd, 2020. And I worked as a clerk for the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd wards in Aston Township to do poll consolidation. There were 5 workers along with myself working the polling location for the first election with new machines, paper ballots, and in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic. The majority party in Aston is the same one, right? It's the same story.
it's the same
It's
story.
the
I
same
think.
story.
Yeah.
But we'll see how long this one is. Not too long. Majority party in Aston, the Republican Party in 2 wards, neglected to share the information with the voters in the minority party and the Democratic Party, that their judge of elections and majority inspectors would not be showing up on election day. Without the notice, the minority party had to react and find coverage on the morning of the election. I was able to leave my normal polling place and fill the position of clerk, while the minority inspector of the 2nd ward was able to act as judge of elections. One other experienced poll worker from Aston 1st ward able to work as well. The Republican Party provided 3 poll workers who had never worked on election day, and their only experience consisted of watching the videos published online by the Bureau of Elections. It's very similar to the one we read passed in 1 through 3. I think in interest of moving forward. And I apologize to Ms. DiValerio, but it's a detailed account of many of the same things in the prior email we got last. And this one is from Christine Iacono, 31 Oakland Road, Westchester, Chadds Ford, Delaware County. And Ms. Iacono is also well known here as someone who come to a lot of meetings and offer important advice and volunteer to help with them. She writes, thank you for taking the time to read my comment. The primary election was problematic throughout Pennsylvania. However, as other counties are being evasive about processes, I wish to commend County Council and the Election Board for being above board and hosting meetings online with public comment. Elections are hard. Act 77 updated Pennsylvania election laws to align with states like Colorado and Washington that offer mail-in ballots in abundance. However, the systems in place at the state and county level were not upgraded to account for the expanded need caused by COVID-19. The law was designed to move toward mail-in ballots gradually. COVID changed that. Every single county in PA had issues with mail-in balloting, precinct consolidation, and ballot count delays. Montgomery, York, and Allegheny County all had thousands of mail-in ballots that were not delivered. The fact that these issues occurred across the state made it evident that the problems are larger than those that could be attributed to the county's management. Does this mean that there is no room for improvement? Of course not. As a member of Citizens for Better Elections, I am collecting data from surveys on the primary and will have a report complete by later this week for review by any interested party. Thank you to all those who took this survey. The feedback offers valuable insight and will be tallied together to create a list of recommendations to approve election items under county control by November. For the big picture, there are still significant changes that need to occur at a state level to ensure that we don't have these same issues in November. The state has called for a report on the primary, but that's not due till August. By then, it will be too late to make purchase decisions for additional equipment in time for November. Delco may need extra printers, mail sorters, label machines, and other mail-related items that work in tandem with state databases to print out the ballots. The state database needs to be able to handle the workload without crashing and slowing down. To all still paying attention, please call your state senators and representatives. Ask them to move up the election report so that critical infrastructure that needs improvement at the state level can be updated and in working order for November. Thank you for your time, Christine Iacono, Citizens for Better Elections. Okay, we just filled a couple more. That one, somebody had problems getting on the Zoom. This is from Councilwoman Christine Ruther. Councilwoman Ruther writes, as a member of County Council who serves as a liaison with the Delaware County Election Board and the Election Department, I have a close-up view of the effort that went into the June 2nd primary elections. While certain parts of the process need improvement, I can say that I was inspired by the effort that I saw on the part of all our election department staff. I think they did a tremendous job taking into account the lack of resources that goes back many years. Last November, Act 77 essentially created a whole second election process to administer with vote by mail at a time when the county's understaffed departments were already dealing with new machines. The council majority last year did not put any money in the budget to implement mail-in voting. When we took office in January, we stepped in to fill vacant positions in the county elections department and worked to bring county resources from other departments to bear for the primary. Then COVID hit and upset all kinds of plans, including when people would vote and how many would vote by mail. I do not think the process was perfect. The good news is that we now know what is needed and will find a way to address the resources and requirements set by the election board. We also need to help our other stakeholders, specifically our county's political parties. For some reason, the Delaware County Republican Party decided this year to give up its long practice of assisting and staffing election boards at the polls, despite invitations to participate in polling place consolidation and emergency poll worker recruitment. I understand that the chair of the Delco GOP sent a letter to poll workers telling them not to show up. Some polling places connected with the Republican GOP leadership pulled out in the days before the election. I can only assume some people were trying to disrupt what they thought would be a pretty meaningless election. They did a disservice to all voters. I am betting all the poll workers who failed to show up on June 2nd will be back in the fall, insisting on their right to control polling places. Hopefully they would take the time to get trained on the new machines and paper ballots, since they do not have the experience of this past primary. I can only speak for myself, but I think all council shares my goal of making sure that every eligible voter can cast a ballot in a November election and that their votes are counted. I hope that all responsible stakeholders take the same view. Christine Ruther, Possum Hollow Road, Wallingford. That's it. The next couple were just people asking about their ballot. Okay. I think that concludes, unless any of the other members have something to add. No?
No, thank you.
All right. Again, I echo the comments of my fellow board members and what we said at the start. We saw some really extraordinary efforts this election, and we're grateful for those and we're thankful for those. We recognize that there were mistakes, there were things that could be done better, and we've all pledged that we are going to get to work on that. I know, in fact, it starts tomorrow. We're meeting with the county council tomorrow morning. We will put our noses to the grindstone, and we have bright, talented people on this board, and we have bright, talented people and hardworking people that throughout our system, and we will be better. So, thank you, and we're adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.